Get Dickens and his ghost. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson may feel as though he's being haunted by three parties of Christmas past. A trio of COVID rule-breaking gatherings allegedly held last Christmas across the UK government during lockdown. They're to be investigated as pressure grows on the Prime Minister. CNN understands that Mr Johnson himself gave an impromptu speech at one of them, and an alleged December 18th party is already sending shockwaves through Downing Street, along with outrage across the country. As the backlash intensifies, the Prime Minister quickly rolled out what he's calling Plan B, a tightening of pandemic rules to curb the spread of the Omicron variant. He's advising people in England to work from home if possible. He's also expanding mask wearing and mandating the use of vaccine passports in large venues.
Let's do everything we can to protect ourselves and our loved ones this winter and to reduce the pressures on our NHS. As we learn more, so we will be guided by the hard medical data around four key criteria: the efficacy of our vaccines and our boosters, the severity of Omicron, the speed of its spread, and the rate of hospitalisations.
The timing of this so-called Plan B is sensitive. Some critics in Boris Johnson's own Conservative Party claim he's using it as a way to distract and deflect from all the controversy. CNN's Nina Dos Santos is at Downing Street for us. The irony, perhaps, of this investigation is that it does actually extend the story, doesn't it? It means it's not going to go away until we've got the result.
Yeah, that's right. We know that 3 investigations are taking place as per today from the Cabinet Office, which is essentially the beating heart of the government and the man who's been enlisted to look into all of that as the most senior civil servant in the UK. Now, these 3 events that they're looking into appear to have happened, 2 of them here at Downing Street, the Prime Minister's own official residence, where, of course, all of his offices are. Sometime between November and December this time last year, there's also another event that they're looking into that appears to have taken place inside the Department of Education. Now, what's important about all of this is that even though this was a year ago, it was at a time when London and this part of the country was under Tier 3 restrictions, meaning that effectively it was locked down and Christmas parties were banned. The Prime Minister insists, and did so again earlier today in the House of Commons, that he knows of no rule breaking that took place. But one of his senior aides still had to make a tearful resignation yesterday evening after she was caught seemingly in an unguarded remark when they were rehearsing for a media briefing in Downing Street, making light of these rules and this alleged Christmas party that might or might not have taken place here a year or so ago. A lot of this is creating confusion, many people say, in the UK as to whether or not they should or shouldn't have Christmas parties. And the backdrop to all of this, as you pointed out, is this tightening of the restrictions, which ironically, Max, means that as of Monday next week, people won't be able to go to the office, but they might still be able to have a legitimate Christmas party with their colleagues, whilst the government is still explaining whether or not it had Christmas parties here this time last year. Max?
Opposition members of Parliament calling for his resignation. They've done that before. It doesn't really go anywhere, does it? As long as he has the support of those backbenchers. But those backbenchers are only going to give him the support as long as he's popular. How's it looking for him?
Well, recent polls indicate that he's losing some of that popularity, even among some of the people who voted for him. And if you listen to some of the statements made in the House of Commons earlier today from some of the backbench MPs who've been becoming increasingly disgruntled with the leader of their party, Boris Johnson, you can hear that they're starting to speak up on behalf of their constituents, so extremely irate about what may or may not have happened this time last year at some of these alleged Christmas parties or gatherings. What they want is answers to this. They want the Prime Minister to be very, very clear about what happened. The other thing that they also want is to know whether or not he really does have a plan for whether or not Christmas will be cancelled this year. Because as we know, he's moved to this Plan B. But yesterday evening, I was spending some time filming in the hospitality sector, some Christmas parties, and there's still huge confusion here about what is or isn't allowed, what may or may not come. And remember, today is the day when the Prime Minister and his wife, Carrie Simons, welcomed their second child, the birth of a daughter. None of that has taken the issue off the front pages. This story that has now been called Partygate, it's starting to affect the Prime Minister's popularity, Max.
Well, congratulations for their personal news, at least, Nina, in Downing Street. Thank you very much indeed. Some encouraging news on the vaccine front, meanwhile. 2 Israeli studies find booster doses of Pfizer's COVID vaccine reduce infections and deaths by 90% or more. It's one of several new pieces of evidence that they say, yes, boosters are still protective even against new variants. However, there are still so many people around the world still in need of a first shot. Now, my next guest insists that, quote, wholesale boosting is not the solution right now, and that it is the primary cause of vaccination that is going to protect against severe disease in death. Those words from the World Health Organization's chief scientist, Dr. Soumya Swaminathan. She joins me now from Geneva. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm speaking to you from London. There are restrictions here coming in. They're not as severe as they are in other parts of Europe, and that's because the government says that the best line of defence for Brits here is the booster programme. What do you make of that?
Thank you very much for that question. At the WHO, of course, we have to take a global view, and then countries put in place the policies and implement them depending on their local context. When we take a global view, it's clear that we still have about half the world that has not received the primary course of vaccination, including the fact that only 1 in 4 healthcare workers in Africa have been fully vaccinated. And there are plenty of vulnerable people out there that still need to get their first and their second shots. Now, data from country after country, including the US, the UK, Israel, Chile, etc., show that the people who are in hospital now, especially in critical care, and those who are dying, are overwhelmingly the unvaccinated. And while there is some evidence of waning of immunity, particularly after 6 months or so with many of the vaccines, and particularly in the older age groups, what is clear is that all of the vaccines continue to offer high degree of protection against severe disease and death, even at 6 months out. And so, the view that we're taking is, for this stage of the pandemic, our goal is to prevent deaths as quickly as possible. We're still seeing 50,000 deaths a week. This is not acceptable. And as I said, 97% or so of those deaths are in the unvaccinated, in countries across the world, not just in the low-income countries. And so that's why countries need to focus on getting those unvaccinated people to come in and get their shots. Boosters may be for some selected, yes, the high-risk groups, the immunocompromised, the very elderly, but also the other public health measures that you talked about, not lockdowns. We're not recommending lockdowns, but certainly universal masking, paying attention to ventilation, making sure that we're not gathering in big groups in indoor settings. All of the things we know drive transmission up. I think that's really going to have to be the focus for the coming weeks and months.
I mean, in very simple terms, new variants like Omicron are less likely, aren't they, in future, if countries that aren't vaccinated get the vaccine, because these new variants are more likely to emerge out of communities where there's no vaccination.
That's right. I mean, this was entirely predictable. We didn't know where and when and what type of variant would emerge, but as long as you have surging infections, ongoing transmission in some parts of the world, nobody is going to be safe, because the virus is just looking for opportunities to mutate, to evolve, and to become more transmissible. Basically, the virus is constantly trying to make itself more efficient, and that's what it's done now. It's made itself even more efficient at transmitting, and this is likely to continue to happen. This is not going to be the last variant we see, and that's why, again, to come back to the question of what should we do with the vaccine supplies we have, the priority should be to vaccinate the high-risk vulnerable groups across the world in all countries before we start giving third and fourth shots to people who've already had their primary course.
It must be very frustrating then for you to see, booster programs being ramped up because of a new variant, which could have been, less likely to occur if vaccines had been given to the developing world and parts of Africa, for example. I spoke in the last hour to the doctor who first noticed the symptoms of Omicron in South Africa. Her view is that the symptoms aren't as bad as people in the West perhaps think they are, and actually the West is overreacting to Omicron. Is that your view as well?
Well, the early signs and descriptions of cases from South Africa in particular, but also from other countries, does show that, most of the cases so far have been mild. We haven't had deaths reported. But then, that's usually the case at the beginning of every new wave with a new variant. So we need to be a little cautious before we conclude that this is a milder form of the virus. And even if it is, which we hope it is, the fact that you're going to have very large numbers because it's so highly transmissible will still mean that people are going to get sick. So I think we still need to go back to the basics. And the difference today is that we're in a different position. We have a lot of tools at our disposal. We have diagnostics, we have vaccines, we have therapeutics. We need to use them wisely and equitably. And so, yes, we were not surprised, I think, and I hope we've had many wake-up calls and reminders. This is the fifth variant of concern that we've seen. I do hope, at least now, that countries will wake up to the reality that this pandemic is not going to end if we continue to focus our efforts within national boundaries.